Good evening. Welcome to tonight's Planning Commission meeting. It's August 11, and we welcome your participation and attendance at tonight's meeting. As you can see, Chairman Bourgeois is not present. He has to actually recuse himself from 2 of the 3 agenda items. So as Vice Chair, I'll be running tonight's meeting. A couple of housekeeping before we begin. Just a reminder to my commissioners as well as those in the audience that if you can silence any of your electronic devices, and if you plan on speaking, you may actually have to turn it off. We've had previous instances of phone interfering with our recording equipment, so just keep that in mind. Second, all of the documents that the commissioners have in front of them are for public information. So if you need a copy of anything, they should be out in the front on the lobby. And if you are watching on TV, all our documents are on our homepage. And the third one is if you do plan on speaking, we do ask a speaker card from all of our speakers. It is available behind the benches, and we do need that for our recording information. Okay? Now with that, I would like to ask Ms. Bailey to take our official roll call.
Commissioner O'Donnell?
Here.
Commissioner Erickson?
Here.
Commissioner Jensen?
Here.
Commissioner Machichi will be arriving late, but he will be here. Commissioner Talasfor?
Here.
Commissioner Sayoc?
Here.
And Chair Bourgeois is recusing himself, so as Mariko has said, will not be in attendance tonight.
And if I can ask Commissioner Erickson, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, let's go ahead and begin with the minutes from July 28, 2010, our last meeting. I look to my commissioners for any comments and or a motion for approval. Commissioner Erickson?
I would move to adopt the minutes for the meeting of July 28th as distributed in the packet to the Commission.
Okay. Commissioner Jensen, I'm sorry.
Second.
Okay, so all those in favor?
Aye.
And any decline? Okay, so I have approval of the minutes. And then I ask Ms. Bailey, do we have any written communications?
Yes, we do. We have a desk item for item number 2, and that's available in the foyer for those who are interested.
Okay. So I took a quick look at it, Commissioners. It is pretty lengthy. So right before we move to agenda item 2, if you do need more time, just signal and I'll allow it, okay? And requested continuances, we have none for tonight. And I'm going to move on to subcommittee reports. All of the commissioners here are appointed by your town council to make recommendations and decisions on land use matters. We also sit on subcommittees. And so I don't know if there have been any meetings since our last meeting. Okay, so no subcommittee reports. And we are now to verbal communications. This is the portion of the meeting where anyone can speak for 3 minutes on any item not on the agenda. So if there's something that you'd like to discuss with the commissioners, now's the time to do so. I don't have any speaker cards, and I don't see anyone moving. Okay, is that for a specific agenda? Okay. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and close verbal communications then. And we are now to the consent calendar. Consent calendar, there's one item, and actually this item I will be recusing myself from because I live within 500 feet. But if it is not pulled, then I can go ahead and ask the question. There's no indication from my commissioners that they'd like to pull this item from consent, and I don't have any cards. So I'm going to go ahead and see my commissioners if anyone would like to make a motion for consent. So, Commissioner Jensen?
I move that we approve the consent calendar, which now consists of conditional use permit application U-10-015, 15200 Los Gatos Boulevard, Suite 100, with the terms and conditions as contained in a staff report.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion, we have a second, and I'll go ahead and see all those in favor.
Aye.
Okay, let the record show 4 in favor and 1 recusal. And we now go to our continued public hearings portion. Agenda item 2 is on the location at 15881 Linda Avenue and 15950 Stephanie Lane. And it is a plan development. We have application PD-08-004, Environmental Impact Report EIR-09-01, and architecture and site applications S-08-014 through S-08-020. So I do ask staff, do you have a summary and staff report that you can provide? Yes?
Were you going to give us time to look at the
Yes.
after staff report?
After staff report?
Okay, or
Okay.
now?
Yes, Heather Bradley will be presenting staff report. I'd like to introduce Ms. Bradley. She is a planning consultant working for the town, and her consulting firm is the M Group.
Thank you, Chairwoman and members of the Commission. The applicant is requesting approval of a plan development, lot line adjustment, and architecture and site applications to approve a 7-lot subdivision and construct 7 new market-rate single-family homes. An environmental impact report has been prepared for the project, and Stephanie Streeler, the environmental consultant, as well as Bill DeVella, the consulting biologist, and Stephanie Conran, the consulting hydrologist, are present for questions on the EIR tonight. They're sitting behind me. The Linda Avenue parcel contains approximately 1.4 acres, and the Stephanie Lane parcel approximately 1.8. The applicant proposes to adjust the property line and rezone a total of 2.35 acres from R18 to R18 PD, and leave the remainder piece of approximately 0.9 acres to the current property owner on Stephanie Lane. Existing on-site structures would be demolished. The proposal includes dedication of 9,640 square feet of creek and riparian area to the town, and additional lands totaling 9,728 square feet dedicated as an easement to the Santa Clara Valley Water District. Additionally, 11,117 square feet of the riparian canopy would be protected through implementation of a 10-foot building setback from the edge of the riparian zone, and approximately 3,000 square feet of common open space between lots 3 and 4 would provide further habitat. The Department of Fish and Game made the determination that a 10-foot setback from the edge of the riparian drip line would be a sufficient buffer between the proposed development and the creek and riparian zone. These dedications of approximately 1/3 of the site reduce the overall land area for development, necessitating the request for variation to the standards for lot size, floor area, and street width. The proposal would require removal of 45 trees, including an invasive eucalyptus tree within the riparian habitat, and 35 non-native horticultural and fruit trees. And grading activities on the site include approximately 5,000 cubic yards of cut and approximately 3,000 cubic yards of fill. The proposed density of 3.98 units per acre is compatible with the Linda Avenue and Roshan Terrace neighborhood, which has a density of approximately 3.4 units per acre. The proposed lots range in size from 7,885 square feet to 11,238 square feet, and the proposed houses range from approximately 2,500 to 3,000 square feet, which is compatible with houses in the immediate neighborhood. The proposed residences would be visible to 2 neighboring properties on Roshan Terrace, but would only be partially visible to other neighboring properties. The prior development proposal for a 7-lot subdivision on this site was reviewed by the Planning Commission in October of 2007 and approved by the Town Council in January of 2008. Subsequently, the Ross Creek Neighbors Group filed a lawsuit challenging the basis for the environmental review and mitigated negative declaration. Demolition activities on the site were halted, and the court ultimately directed the town to prepare an environmental impact report for the project. The town commenced hiring an EIR consultant and held a public scoping meeting in the spring of 2009 to solicit community input on the scope of the EIR. Between the spring and summer of this year, the draft EIR was circulated for public comment, and the final EIR was released in July. Included in the final EIR were responses to all comments received on the draft EIR. During the preparation of the final EIR, the applicant had the entire riparian canopy resurveyed to verify a discrepancy that was noted by a commenter on the draft EIR in regards to a blue oak tree which is growing horizontally on the property between lots 3 and 4. As a result, minor revisions were made to the development plans, which included reorienting the garage on Lot 3, relocating an energy dissipator in the common open space area, and scaling back the deck designs on Lots 1 and 2. Because these revisions were considered minor and did not result in any changes to the significant impacts of the project, it was not necessary to recirculate the EIR. The EIR has identified 5 impact categories, including biological resources, hydrology, water quality, air quality, geology, and soils, and noise. However, all impacts have been mitigated to a less than significant level through the provision of mitigation measures, which have been incorporated into the approval documents. The EIR must discuss a range of alternatives which could reasonably and feasibly meet the basic objectives of the project. The EIR has provided an analysis of 3 project alternatives, including a no project alternative, which was not found to meet the basic project objectives. A 6-lot and a 5-lot alternative were also discussed. Both of these were found to slightly lessen impacts to special status animal species. However, neither alternative would eliminate any significant impacts, and therefore staff is recommending approval of the project as proposed. The project was reviewed for consistency with the 2000 and draft 2020 general plan and was found to be consistent, and has further been reviewed by the consulting arborist and consulting architect, who both found that the project was consistent with the tree ordinance and architectural context of the neighborhood. The project has also been found to be in conformance with the town's infill and traffic policies, and the project is expected to generate less than 5 a.m. peak hour trips and 6 p.m. peak hour trips. However, the project would be required to provide a community benefit. The applicant has offered to make improvements to the intersection of Linda Avenue and Blossom Hill Road, including a left turn pocket. This proposed benefit would improve circulation in the surrounding neighborhood, and the project would provide open space and riparian protections along the creek corridor, as well as additionally, the project has been designed to be compatible with the neighborhood with respect to scale and character, lot size, setbacks, and densities, and has shown an excellence in architecture and design, which meets all the criteria for infill development proposals. The applicant will also be required to pay a BMP in lieu fee. The applicant has provided a Build It Green checklist, which shows utilization of erosion control measures, landscape and construction materials to achieve energy efficiency and conservation of resources with a total of 100 points. In conclusion, staff believes that the Commission should carefully consider the requested exceptions, the architecture and site criteria, neighborhood compatibility, community benefit, tree removals, and consistency with the general plan and guidelines and standards for land uses near streams. Staff has reviewed these issues and believes that the Commission should forward a recommendation to the Town Council for certification of the EIR and approve the plan development application, as well as the site and approve the site and architectural applications contingent on approval of the EIR and plan development application by the Town Council. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bradley. Okay, so I'd like to give the Commission, my commissioners, about 5 minutes to review the material that's in front of them. If we don't need the 5 minutes, then we can go and do so. But real quick, Ms. Bradley, could you just summarize what is in front of us for a dusk item?
You received an email from a neighboring property owner, Mr. David Kreitz, with some old letters and legal issues that were submitted subsequent to the prior approvals of.
Okay. I am looking to the commissioners. It looks like most of you have read it, so we don't need more time? No. Okay. Very good. Very good. Okay. Any questions of staff? Yes, Commissioner Jensen.
Two. One is related to the desk item. So all of the letters that are contained after the email were submitted by Mr. Kreitz. So I'm particularly interested in the very last page. It has a identifier, McElroy Properties, Inc., and it's dated March 13th, 2008, and it's not addressed to anyone. Who did it go to? You know?
I do not know. I believe it went to members of the Ross Creek Neighbors Group.
Okay.
That would be a question for the applicant.
Okay. And another question. What would be the purpose of making contingent findings? Assuming that any part of this is approved and it goes to town council, it's going to come back for architecture and site. Why would the planning commission spend time making any kind of contingent findings?
Actually, the architecture and site applications are before you tonight as well as the plan development.
Then why are they contingent?
You can't approve an architecture and site application unless the plan development is approved. So therefore, if you wanted to approve the architecture and site applications tonight, they would only be contingent upon the council certifying the EIR and approving the plan development.
Follow-up?
Yes.
Assuming, okay, I understand that if the project were denied, we obviously wouldn't make any findings. Let's imagine that the project were forwarded in some form different than what's being requested by the applicant. Would contingent findings still be appropriate,
Yes, they would.
even if there's only 5 houses?
If you're, well, you would be,
Well, they would be conditioned, if you approve 7, let's say that it went forward with your recommendation for 7 lots and 7 A&S, and the council decided it was 5, then by the fact that they're conditional, they would have to come back and get redesigned.
Okay, I'm positing the situation where the planning commission says 5. What then?
Well, the planning commission says 5. I don't think we have a land plan for 5, so that would have to,
Right.
it would go forward to the council as 7 lot with a recommendation of 5. If the council agreed with the planning commission, it would go back through redesign, come back up through the planning commission.
So if, and this is all hypothetical, if there was something for less than 7 lots, contingent architecture and site findings would not be appropriate, correct?
No, I think you'd still, well, it's up to the commission, but it'd still probably be useful to go through that as though it could be approved by the council, because the council would want you're being asked to have final approval authority actually on the architectural site. So it would be, again, it would be conditional. The commission could say, no, they don't want to spend the time on doing that and wait to see what the council does. That would be within your authority.
Okay, thanks. That's all I wanted to know.
But if I could point out something to my commissioners, under the conditions of approval tonight with the PD, it says that should the plan development be approved and forwarded to town council, that architecture and site decisions would be made by DRC. So I think it would behoove us to make any comments that we have specific to architecture and site in this record so that it would be available to the town council in their deliberations, regardless of which decision they move with the plan development.
No, yes, I agree with you that sounds appropriate. I'm just wondering why we're going to make contingent architecture and site. I can see if we say 7, okay, we're acting as though the town council is going to approve it. I'm trying to figure out the process if we didn't say 7, that's all. And so what you're telling me is, well, if we don't say 7, we should make comments anyway, correct? But we don't necessarily have to make contingent findings if we choose not to.
But if you agree that you want to go with the smaller plan development application, then you should continue the architecture site applications to a date certain.
Okay, and Commissioner O'Donnell, you had your hand raised. Do you have a comment?
Two comments, I guess. One, obviously, Commissioner Jensen has a point which would be more easily addressed if we get there. Secondly, what I just heard also does make sense. So in either event, I don't know that we have to hypothetically reach a decision based on something that hasn't yet occurred. But clearly, if one were to not approve what is before us on architectural site approval, I don't think there's anything before us to approve. Because in architectural site approval, we're approving certain lots, which if we decided we weren't going to do 7 lots, we wouldn't have a plan before us. So I don't think we could do that. But again, whether I'm right or I'm wrong, I would merely suggest that we wait till we get there so we could get the hearing underway.
I just wanted to ask the question because I've never seen a request for us to make any kind of contingent finding before. This is new to me. So whether we get there or not, I agree with Commissioner O'Donnell, but I've never seen that recommendation.
This project, I think we can all agree, is fairly complex, and there's many layers to it. So after the public portion where the audience speaks and we begin our deliberations, I'm going to just break it down into the many recommendations and decisions that we do have to make tonight, and hopefully it won't be so hypothetical, and we can get to those, and one could lead to the next. Okay. Just a reminder, I do need speaker cards, especially one from the applicant. If you do plan to speak, we have 5 minutes for the applicant. All those who would like to comment on the project, you have 3 minutes, and then the applicant will then have 5 minutes again to wrap up based on anything that they hear tonight. And when you do come to the podium, if you could state your name and your address so that we could clearly have that on the record. Okay. I guess I'll get a card, but it looks like Mr. Garner, you'll be speaking as the applicant? Okay, Mr. Garner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Commissioners, thank you for reviewing this site again. It is a complicated site. We have been working on it for 5 years now, since 2005. I'm Aaron Garner. I'm a resident of 15936 Berry Lane, Montecito, California. Terry McElroy will also present briefly tonight and potentially answer questions. He's at, is it 214 Almendra in Los Gatos. We also have a few other of our owners here. We are both principal owners of the property. I just wanted to briefly introduce the project. At this point, this project complies with all town ordinances and with the general plan, including zoning. It's been in the planning stage, as I mentioned, for over 5 years now. It was initiated in 2005. We put in an application for 11 lots at that time, and it was reduced to 9, then 8, and now it's at 7. A small group, as Ms. Bradley mentioned, a small group calling itself Ross Creek Neighbors, consisting primarily of nearby county residents, filed a lawsuit against the town and us, saying that we needed an EIR rather than a mitigated negative declaration that we had prepared. They prevailed in that lawsuit, and the court granted the petition and required that an EIR be prepared. We have recently completed that EIR after 1.5 years of preparation. Typical EIR might take 3 to 6 months, a long-term one, a year. This one took 1.5 years because of all the comments and feedback that it received. According to the EIR, this project as proposed creates no significant environmental impacts. The temporary impacts that have been identified that may be caused by construction are to be mitigated as detailed in the EIR. The project is still essentially the same project that was approved in 2007, except at this point, the setbacks from Ross Creek and the associated riparian corridor have been slightly increased in some areas. The project will improve and restore Ross Creek and the riparian corridor by removing non-native species and replanting and restoring native species. The homeowners association for the project that's been identified in the project will manage and monitor activity along the creek to ensure environmental protection. These are measures which are badly needed along Ross Creek at this point. In addition to helping the town meet its housing goals, This project also reduces urban sprawl by protecting the environmentally pristine hillside areas and encouraging pedestrian activity. It encourages and builds community connections. These are design principles that are strongly recommended by the Association of Bay Area Governments. This project will increase property tax revenue from approximately $20,000 to an estimated $175,000. This is an exceptional plan development. It incorporates excellence in design and environmental protection, and it provides individually unique custom homes for all 7 lots. That's very unusual for a subdivision of this kind. More than 12 agencies have reviewed and approved the proposal, and the majority of neighbors that own property next door to the Linda Court development fully support this proposal and hope that you will support it as well. We believe that the attention we've paid to design and environmental stewardship, the support of the agencies and the majority of the adjacent households, and the completion of this EIR make this project ready for final approval, and we request your support tonight. Thank you, and Terry, do you have anything brief to add?
Yes, Terry McElroy, 214 Almendra. I have something just very brief. At the close of the evening tonight, I'm hoping to be able to thank the Planning Commission for approving this project for the second time. It was almost 3 years ago that you did pass it along, approved, and that was without all this volume of study that has gone on since. The study pretty much provides a confirmation of what your action was 3 years ago. It provides confirmation you did the right thing. So we're asking for you to approve it as it is and pass it on so we can get going to the council next week. That's it.
Okay, if you could both stay there and see if we have any questions. I did see Commissioner Jensen raise her hand.
My questions are for Mr. Garner.
Yes.
Mr. Garner, you began your remarks by saying that your project has proposed compliance with all town ordinances.
Yes.
And I wonder how you reconcile with that with the 3 exceptions we're being asked to make to town code, which are reduced area for 1 lot, increased floor area ratios, and a reduced street width.
Okay, thanks, Ms. Jensen. Actually, Terry will address it because he's familiar with the plan development aspect of the.
Well, I know that those are part of a plan development. My question is, you indicated that you were complying with town ordinance.
Yes.
You're asking for exceptions.
And actually, we're not, as I understand it, asking for exceptions. We're asking for exceptions. It's a little bit confusing in terms of the wording in the staff report and just as you read the code, but the way I understand it is that in a plan development, you aren't really asking for exceptions. You're asking for the exception to create a plan development, but you're not. But once you have a plan development, you don't require exceptions to address those 3 issues.
Okay, that answer, you've addressed my question. My second question is that the environmental impact report has 3 alternatives that are suggested. 1 is no project. Clearly, you don't want that. I wonder what you've done to look into alternatives 1 and 2, which are for 1 fewer house and 2 fewer houses.
Sure. We have looked at it. We haven't created designs for it. As I mentioned earlier in the introduction, we have been through many plans on this project. We started with 11 homes. In our first version, we had 2 below market price units, then 1 below market price unit. We had hoped to build a model below market price unit here, and those were eliminated based on the feedback from the neighbors. And I think we felt that this project has gone on for so long, and that we have made so many concessions that there is great value in us to having 7 lots, and I think that there's great value to the town in having a density that will prevent us from having to move into the hillside areas to develop. This is an urban fill area, so I think that we felt that we wanted to get as many as we could in here.
I think I made.
Okay, Mr. Gardner has answered my questions. I don't know if you want to comment on them or not, but
I would like to
thank you.
comment on one issue. in order to look at, let's say, the 6-lot, if that is slightly environmentally superior, and that's slightly, and that's because in the place of 2 houses, you could put 1 house there, and it may be, you have to remember, there's only a certain amount of distance from the front setback to the rear setback. They're not super.
Actually, Mr. McElroy, if I could ask you to speak in the microphone, so this is being recorded.
Okay. So if you're putting 1 house in this area, or 2 houses, you're maybe only a few feet from the sensitive area. And so there's an alternative that the town came up with, actually Sandy came up with this. You could achieve the same exact environmental situation by just moving the house up 5 feet. With a PD, you have the ability to do that. So you've achieved the same thing without going to 6. Does that make sense?
Well, you've responded to my question. Thank you.
Do I have any other questions from any of the commissioners? Okay, so you will have 5 minutes at the end to wrap up and to rebut to anything you may hear tonight, okay?
Perfect.
Okay, if I could have Mr. David Kreitz.
Do we have 3 minutes?
Yes.
Okay, great. So my name is Dave Kreitz. I'm from 15900 Roshan Terrace in Los Gatos. Ross Creek is a navigable stream according to state law. As a result, the state's Subdivision Map Act requires the creek open space to be made accessible to the public. This project does not provide that access. You may remember that the Water District also advised the applicant to provide access to the creek by eliminating the homes backing up to the creek. You may still remember also that the streamside standards require the same thing. And it's also worth noting that the General Plan Open Space Policy 3.4 requires projects to, quote, provide access to natural open space. This project does not provide any of those accesses. This project violates Section 29.10.0990, Paragraph 5 of the Tree Conservation Ordinance, which limits tree removals for the purpose of subdivision to those trees that inhibit access to the property and those that are a geologic hazard. This project does not comply with the top of bank stability, riparian zone, and riparian buffer standards in the town's streamside standards. The top of bank identified in the plans does not contain the active floodplain, so the bank stability standard is being applied to the wrong bank. The riparian zone excludes trees that the California Department of Fish and Game identified in 2007 as riparian. The riparian zone is mapped based on CAD canopy estimates rather than the actual drip lines. So, for example, the blue oak, there's a huge blue oak on the property. It's mapped significantly wrong, and all of the drip line is not included in the riparian zone. Then, on top of that, the project applies a mere 10-foot protective buffer, which is exactly the buffer size the Water District publication calls, quote, not enough to protect the riparian zone. I have a list of other compliance issues that I can run through with you quickly if you'll simply ask me to. Otherwise, I'll conclude by asking you to support the environment, or at least support the law of the land by advising against this project.
Commissioner Jensen.
Mr. Kreitz, I want to sort of ask you a reverse question that I asked Mr. Garner and Mr. McElroy. Clearly, they want no project. Clearly, you want no project. I mean, clearly, they want a project. You want no project. Of alternatives 1 and 2 presented in the EIR, which is a 6-lot or a 5-lot subdivision, would you be prepared to support either one of those?
Well, so I have to say I don't support no project here. I think a project would be fine on this property, but as I noted in my comments, several organizations, the state law, the guidelines and standards all support a project that has homes on the opposite side of the street, not homes along the creek. And in my comments on the EIR, I asked the town to consider that project, and it's not been considered, and that's another CEQA violation. The alternative analysis in the EIR is completely not sufficient. and doesn't meet state standards in CEQA law. The town should be considering alternatives, a reasonable range of alternatives that would include a plan that sets back further from the riparian zone. Instead of this crazy 10-foot setback, the town should be considering a larger setback. The town should be considering a plan that maps the top of bank based on the definition in the guidelines and standards and see what kind of project would fit on the site. The town should consider this 5 or 3 home alternative where none of the trees or none of the homes are sited against the creek.
Do I have any other question of Mr. Prince? Actually, I do have one. There are a lot of issues that will be discussed today, including not only the environmental issues, but density and architecture and site. Considering you are going to be adjacent to one of the buildings to be built, are there any specific architecture and site issues, details that you would like to share with us so that that could be part of what we consider today?
Well, the main thing I would say about the architecture and site application process is that because that process is deferred until after the EIR is certified, it's wholly unacceptable under CEQA law. Because by certifying the EIR and then having the ANS process, the EIR isn't allowed to look at neighborhood compatibility. All of these issues that the ANS committee looks at, the EIR can't comment on, and that's precisely why it shouldn't be deferred. It should be part of this process.
I understand what you're saying, but I'm trying to separate the two. You're correct in that the EIR is not looking at it, but we, this deciding body, does look at it under the plan development, which is what we will also be deliberating on today and making a recommendation on. And so if there were anything that you would like to share with us as we look at this plan development, that's what I was getting at.
Well, I do have a lot to say about the ANS process, but it needs to be part of the EIR process.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Robin Brapp. And I just want to mention that this is the last card that I have, so if there is anyone that would like to speak on this agenda item, please just fill out and submit a card. Okay, Ms. Brapp, you have 3 minutes.
Good evening. I am one of the county people directly across the creek from the plan development at 15840 Loma Vista Avenue. I am not one of the proponents of this project, and I think, other than Mr. Kreitz, I'm probably the one most severely impacted by this project. One of the things I'd like to address is the town's story pole, height and story pole and netting requirements. When this project initially was started, there was a certain number of story poles that went up, some directly across from me, which created basically a wall of houses. At this point in time, one set of story poles has gone up down pretty much out of sight from me with just yellow hazard tape marking out where the proposed, I'm assuming, houses will be. The town's own height and story pole and netting requirements state that it's required for all new residential and non-residential buildings, second-story additions, et cetera, et cetera. I have no idea at this point, other than yellow barrier tape, what the height and scope of these houses are going to be. They are literally 20 feet across the creek from me, in my backyard. Not to mention, I have a 2-story house with picture windows looking out over that piece of property that will be severely impacted by this project. I'm not opposed to something being developed on that property, but I would like to see story poles go up so that I can see the full impact, as hopefully you can, as to what this wall of houses along the creek are going to look like. That's pretty much it.
Do you have any questions for?
And I'm not sure why the story poles haven't gone back up.
Okay. Commissioner Jensen.
I just wanted to ask you the same question regarding alternatives to the project as proposed. Are you prepared to make any comment on, given that there's no story poles, and I have something I want to say to staff about that. Can you give us any comments or insight regarding what you feel about alternative proposals?
Obviously, I'm in agreement somewhat with Mr. Kreitz in that I would like to see homes farther from the creek, ideally a green buffer along the creek, the road, and then houses on the other side of the road. Another thing to consider is that when they remove all the non-native vegetation along the creek, and plant new vegetation, that new vegetation is going to take 5 to 10 years to fully develop, and in the meantime, it's a bare wall of houses on the other side of the creek.
Thank you.
Ms. Bev, I do have a question. Can you remind me, it sounded like you were present when this first came to the commission a couple years ago?
Yes.
And so you were able then to see the 7 story poles that were erected?
They were not all up at that time either.
Okay. So the question I have is, based on what was there, which is more than what is today, can you remind us what your comments were based on the visual that you saw from where you live?
Well, the first time I looked at them, I started literally crying because right now I look over a beautiful orchard, and then when the story poles were there, it was a solid wall, literally, of houses. It was really, really disheartening, disconcerting, disappointing. That's pretty much my view of it.
And so the next question I have is, looking at the documents that I have in front of me, it looks like, have you studied the design plans?
Not recently.
It looks like you will be directly across from Lot 3, and there is a design in front of us. And I understand that Lot 3, there are no story poles, but given what you have seen,
it's huge.
Anything else more specific you can provide as we talk about these architectural sites?
Well, even though I'm directly across from Lot 3, from the upstairs window, I can actually see, and I haven't looked at the lot layout, but I believe it's Lot 1 is closest to Mr. Kreitz's house. Is that correct? Is that where the story poles aren't currently?
That's correct. So
okay, so Lot 2 directly impacts me, Lot 3 directly impacts me, and that creates pretty much the wall of houses.
And my last question is, do you have a 1 or 2 story home?
I have a 2-story home.
Okay, thank you. And commissioners, any other questions? Commissioner Johnson.
It's not for the speaker. I don't know if it's appropriate to raise it now, but it has to do with what she was talking about with the story poles.
Is there any possibility that it may lead to a question to our speaker?
No.
Okay. Well, then I'd rather that we wait, and you can go ahead and have a seat.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Okay. I have Hanley. Is it Yaffe? Yaffe. Okay. And again, this is my last card, so if anyone else would like to speak, please fill out a speaker card.
Good evening. I am a neighbor in the area. Very brief, 2 statements. Mr. Garner has said that the majority of homeowners in the vicinity are heavily in favor of this, or even simply in favor of this. I do not know this to be the case. In fact, I believe this is an outright case of dissembling on his part. Secondly, the one house that was on this property, for which the plans are to demolish it and put up a new home, this house was demolished many months ago, as I understand it, without permission on a Sunday. A court order was obtained on a Sunday prohibiting the completion of the demolition. However, all of this junkyard remainder of the nearly 90% demolished house has remained there for many, many months, probably over a year now, maybe 2 years. I'm wondering what consequence there is to the developers for having done this. Thank you. And again, I'd like to have addressed the claim that the homeowners are in majority in favor of this.
Mr. Yaffe, if you could just please. The first thing I have is your address, please.
15971 Stephanie Lane.
Okay.
I'm right on the creek.
Okay.
It is a gorgeous area.
Okay. Okay. And do I have any questions for Mr. Yaffe? Okay, thank you very much. Have Mr. Carl Ryan?
Hi, good evening. I'm Carl Ryan. I'm 15911 Roshan Court. I just want to reemphasize my opposition and continued opposition to this development. And I think the biggest concern I have about it is I don't think we're going to be able to stop this guy from developing these properties. And you know, I believe in property rights myself, but I believe in responsible development of property, and I think things should be the same as it is in the current neighborhood. I think he's trying to pour too many houses in too small a space, and I just fear that I'm going to be burdened by people parking in front of my house because he's got a golf cart driveway in front of these houses, and you know, I don't really feel like I should. You know, I feel like I should be able to tow these cars away if, you know, they're parking in front of my house, you know, because he can't provide spaces for parking. And I just don't feel that you're giving unequal treatment to the code. The FAR is being ignored. Story poles are being ignored. You're giving this guy special treatment. And if the rules are the rules, you should follow the rules. I mean, if you look at this neighborhood, there aren't that many houses on that small of a space. I mean, it's not like the world's running out of space, especially in Los Gatos. You know, we value the quality of life, the way it looks. We're not trying to this is not, you know, slum tenement. We're not trying to pour houses onto space. I mean, I don't know why you're so motivated to approve this project. I mean, it must be some other reason, so. I would just encourage you to look at the way the current neighborhood's architected and the way this so-called project's being poured onto a small space and how it's going to fit with the rest of, you know, this guy's going to tell you that it fits great because I know that this, you know, the city's going to collect a ton of property taxes that they aren't today, but I don't think that should be your motivation. You should be motivated by the way people have their houses there today. That's all I have to say.
Do I have any questions for Mr. Ryan? Commissioner Telesfori?
Right. Can you tell your address again, please?
15911 Roshan Court.
Roshan Court. And I do have another question. Yes. Commissioner Jensen's been asking speakers about the alternatives. Have you read the staff report? Are you familiar with this?
Honestly, I don't have time to read a lot of paperwork, and
okay.
I just know, I mean, I'm an engineer by training, and I understand space, I understand traffic, and I understand people, and I know there'll be well-to-do people living there, and they'll be throwing a number of parties, and I know how to impact the neighborhood.
The reason I asked was because she was asking, and I'd be interested for us to hear it, if you had any thoughts about the alternative of, you know, no change, 5 houses or 6 houses. Do you have a thought about that?
My big issue is with the whole concept of a planned development. I mean, I've seen planned developments in Scotts Valley. I've seen them in other places. And I mean, I don't even see how you get police and fire units down roads that are planned developments. I mean, the road's the size of a golf cart. You can't even turn around in the street. You can't even park. I mean, it's a joke. I mean, the whole concept of pouring houses into a PD is just, you're trying to utilize every inch of space, and the quality of life, I mean, it's incongruous with the neighborhood. It doesn't fit. The neighborhood's more than 20 years old as it is.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor O'Donnell.
Mr. Ryan, I just want to make sure what you didn't read. We have 2 volumes of EIR. You didn't read any of that?
No, sir.
We have a staff report, plans and drawings. You didn't read any of that?
No, sir.
Okay. Thank you very much.
My heart.
Thank you.
I realize that you don't consider that. So.
Well, I consider your heart.
Do I have any other questions? Okay, Mr. Ryan, thank you. Okay, do I have any other speakers that is interested on this agenda item? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to go ahead and ask the applicant to come back. You have 5 minutes. If you could respond to some of the things you've heard tonight, or if you have something that you'd like to just say to wrap things up.
Yes. Once again, Terry McElroy, 214 Almendra. I have a map here very similar to the map that you saw 3 years ago. 8 out of 13 property owners that are adjacent to this are in favor of it. And we have a book of signed petitions here. I would like to address 2 or 3 of the commenters, because Commissioner O'Donnell was correct. Have you read the EIR? Well, in this case, it says that we have no significant impacts. It's consistent with the town's tree ordinance, the infill policy, the plan development ordinance. We have staff recommendation. There's 17 agencies out there that have approved this project. We have 9 consultants hired by the town that have reviewed the project and found no conflicts. The EIR states that the project's consistent with 29 policies, town policies, and not inconsistent with any. It says that we comply with the guidelines and standards. There were 32 items that we comply with. We're using green building techniques, community benefits, and I think that addresses 90% of what was said before.
A few comments just on specific issues that came up. Oh, thank you. Mr. Kreitz talked about navigable stream, Ross Creek being a navigable stream under state law. We totally disagree. He does a lot of interpretations of law as he stands here that are exactly that, interpretations. When he talks about architectural approval prior to the EIR, when he talks about public access to Ross Creek, ironically, we had public access built into the stream side 5 years ago. 5 years ago, we had a public access path, including an educational program to go with it, to walk school kids along there and teach them about creek habitats. And the neighbors, Ross Creek neighbors and Mr. Kreitz, fought that. They wanted it removed. So that's what we've been dealing with. We've been dealing with Mr. Kreitz as somebody who is not really open to compromise. That's been our experience. In terms of the story polls, I would just want to say that the story polls were up for almost a year. We thought that the EIR process would be complete. We thought that we would still have the story polls there and be able to modify them. Instead, we had to tear them down finally after almost a year because we felt that they were a safety hazard. So most of them came down. There were still some that we left in place. But we did end up doing a modified reinstallation of them at the time.
Mr. Garner, your time is up.
Okay,
but
thank you.
I do want to see if there are any questions from the commissioners. Commissioner Jensen.
Mr. Garner, you and Mr. McElroy have indicated that there are no significant impacts that are created by your project. Just looking at my EIR report, there are 8 listed, albeit they can be mitigated. The report says if we adopt certain mitigation measures, but I'm wondering how you rectify, or how do you state that there are no significant impacts when this report states that there are 8?
Sure. As I said in my opening, the impacts that were identified are to be mitigated as detailed in the EIR. And so there are no significant impacts with the mitigation steps that are taking place. Does that make sense? So there's
Sure.
So there are some. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Yes, it makes sense.
Okay.
Thank you. With respect to the story polls, on page 8 of our staff report, it indicates that you were strongly encouraged to reinstall the story polls, but I gather from just reading the report that economically you didn't want to do that, and there was some justification that most people had seen the story polls. As a planning commissioner who was not on the Planning Commission at the time the story poles were erected, and I believe that's true also of Commissioner Erickson, I feel that I am at a significant disadvantage for not seeing the story poles. So I have trouble considering the architecture in sight. I don't have trouble figuring out the lot layout, but the story poles were a significant, the lack of them is a significant detriment to me being able to adequately consider your project.
I understand. Do you want a response, or?
Sure. Why did you choose not to erect the story poles?
Thank you. Because we couldn't afford it. I mean, I hate to say it, but we're sitting here, we're 5 years into this project. We spent $30,000 installing story poles in 2007. And we were faced with spending another $30,000 this year to do it, and we don't have $30,000. Mr. Kreitz talks about the profit we're going to make on the project. We lost any chance of profit on this project 2 years ago. We are fighting for our life savings right now. So Mr. McElroy and I went out and installed the story poles ourselves. It's not because we didn't want to. We can't afford it. Apologize for it, though.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? I actually do have a couple of questions. With regard to the story poles, can you remind me how many of the 7 did you erect when you first came before us? Did you do all 7? All 7?
Of them,
okay.
yes. Oh.
Wait. I'd like, okay, I have asked Mr. Garner, and so I'd like Mr. Garner, if you can't answer it, then you can call someone, but I don't want people to just jump in.
We did 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, and number 7.
Okay, so you had 1, 3, 4.
1, 2, 3, 4.
1, 2, 3, 4.
7.
And 7, okay. Of those story poles, did you already have the layout envisioned so that the neighbors, particularly I'm concerned about the neighbor that's directly across from Lot 3, are they similar, the architecture, so that at that time she had a good visual of what you had in mind?
She's across from Lot 2 and 3, kind of like sandwiched in the middle there. 2 has not changed. 3 is slightly moved further away from the creek, but it's basically the same height, and it looks the same from the front very much.
Okay. I'm sorry. So more questions that I have for you. Moving away from the environmental issues, okay, there's a lot more to a plan development than environmental. I want you to talk about the density issue. It's a plan development, I understand that, but in general, at least I like to follow the underlying zoning requirements of that property. And I understand the technicality that we're not granting you an exception per se, but the fact that you're not meeting the 8,000 that we would normally have required per square footage per lot, and the FAR, and the street width. Could you just talk a little bit about why your lot and your plan development requires, why it would be exceptional so that these are changes to the underlying zone that I could overlook?
Okay. I'm also thinking that Heather Bradley, who wrote the staff report, I'm sure she's got it like right on the tip of her tongue there, and could probably answer even better than I could.
I understand that, and we have that staff report, but this is an opportunity for you as the applicant to address any of the concerns that we have.
The EIR does say that we are very similar density to the neighborhood. Now, how are you going to measure the density? You know, take the buffer away, take the creek away, take the, this setback, that easement away. So, you can measure it 10 different ways. And so we are very similar to the neighborhood. 3 years ago, you said we were similar to the neighborhood. We have let's see. In our case, I think we have one lot that is 7,800 square feet, and that's Lot 7. That is under 8,000. The rest of them are all over 8,000. And so for that exception, I think with this open space we put, you don't get that open space. You don't get that horizontal tree lying out in the middle of your subdivision in a standard subdivision. So that's a great trade-off. Like parking, for example. I don't know, how many spaces do we have? 30-something parking spaces? You don't get that in a standard subdivision. We have more parking per house than you do in a standard subdivision. So anyway, those are great trade-offs that I could justify very easily. That 7,800 square foot lot, how can you justify that's less than 8,000? I think that's a good way to do it.
Okay, and then what about the FAR?
Besides FAR, it doesn't apply. This was approved with this FAR 3 years ago. What's changed? I would justify that is that FAR is a guideline. It always was. I remember back in the 80s when I first got FARs on University Avenue. That makes sense. You can see those houses, boom, 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 and the mass and the scale of them. We've had Len Pacheco work on this thing, making the mass and scale such that the trade-off is we reduce the mass and scale to cover this FAR. People today, there's a niche. People really want to see like a 2,500, 3,000 square foot house. Nobody wants really like a 5,000 square foot house unless you gave it to them. It's a great market. People with kids that are going to go to our schools, that's the niche that they're looking for. I think there's trade-offs to justify that also.
And then one last question, again, specific to architecture. Looking at the neighborhood, there's a mix of 2- and 1-story homes. When you were designing your planned development, did you give any consideration to a 1-story home so that it would mirror the 2-story, 1-story ratio of your surrounding development?
Yes, we spent a lot of time on that. These houses, the rest of the neighborhood, first of all, is flat. Flat as a pancake. It's easy to build a house on that 1- or 2-story. The challenge is when you have to make a split level and you have a height restriction. So as the house starts going down, you can't make it 2-story in the back. You have to make it 2-story in the front, because suddenly it's going to be like so tall as you move forward. As you move out there, your second story has to be placed over the front part of the house, and so it was a huge challenge. We tried to make a 1-story look. Lot 3 has that 1-story look to it, a story and a half. And if you look at Lot 5, that was going to be our BMP. That is like a very cute house. That has a 1-story look. The garage is tucked underneath. Like over on Loma Alta, there's some houses like that where they put the garage underneath and they put the house on top of it. That has that 1-story look to it. Made a lot of 1-story elements on these too.
Commissioner Jensen, I thought I saw your hand up.
Thank you. I wanted to follow up on the FAR question. We have a staff report which lists 34 houses in the defined neighborhood for purposes of our staff report. In the neighborhood of the existing houses listed, 6 of them have an FAR of 0.25 or over. All 7 of your houses are 0.25 or above. And I'm wondering how you believe, I was here also when the FAR was implemented. I know it was a guideline. First, I used to argue it was a guideline. It was imposed as a rule initially. Now it's more of a guideline. But I wonder how you argue that the FARs of your proposed houses are compatible with the existing neighborhood.
That's a good question. I would have to defer to the town's architect and the EIR itself. That I wish I could pull it up here in front of me because I don't know where it is in here, but it has these houses. You don't, as you're driving down Linda, you're not going to be able to see them. You may see the glimpse of one, but there's a big redwood tree. That would be like Lot 7. The big redwood tree is there, and we've got the stakes out there with a little ribbon going around it. You may be able to see part of that. And that one is going to look, that's the one like directly behind this young man right here, number 7. So you're going to see that porch sticking out, and it's a little wooden porch. It's pretty cool. It's going to have a 2-story look to it, but it's going to look like that. It's broken up by that that covered porch. So it's cut the mass way down. That is that one. I think your question was, again,
I'm not really interested in how they look. I'm interested in the FARs for your proposed houses. All of them are at or above
the neighborhood.
the neighborhood. How do you argue to me that they are compatible with the neighborhood? I'm not interested in how they look.
I would say that I concur with the town architect, the staff report, and the EIR that says that they are compatible with the neighborhood. They're the experts, and I agree with them that it won't have any impact on the neighborhood, any adverse impact. People across the street, it says that it'll be almost no impact. I mean, across the creek, almost no impact. The back of those houses primarily are, like, Lot 1 is like a one-story back there. Lot 3 looks like a one-story. Lot 4 is all by itself, where there's nothing, like, nobody can even see that one. A lot of the houses are very far from the creek, 80-something feet from the creek. And then the distance between Lot 3 and 4 is over 100 feet between those two houses. We have, between Mr. Kreit's house and Lot 1, the living space is 20 feet from the property line. I mean, we didn't do little 8-foot setbacks. We did account for all that stuff. Cool.
Commissioner Telespori, did you have a question?
I did. I have two questions. So what I wanted to know, getting back to this table on page 10 of the staff report, and it's showing the floor area ratio in comparison to the lots. Could I ask on Lot 2, at 2883, that house size, you put that third largest house in your development on one of the smallest lots. Could I ask why you've done that and not put perhaps the house design on another lot? I mean, that's...
Okay, two things, two questions. There's no way that we could ever move one house to another lot. These have to be designed for they're designed for the space that they're in, designed for the slope. Like, you couldn't put the house on Lot 2 and put it on number 7. So it would have to be a total redesign. But the reason why that house is there... Pardon?
Yes, okay, yes.
So the reason why that house is in that location is because that lot used to be a couple thousand square feet bigger before we had the EIR. And that is the reason. We have our friend, the San Francisco dusky-footed wood rat, back there, and we're protecting that. The trade-off we made, but it didn't change the size of the house.
Okay. Now, then my other question is about, you were talking about the height of your homes, and it's been brought up by some of the neighbors. So can you review with us, so I'm perfectly clear about the height of the lot, of the individual homes? I've seen 30 feet, I've seen 27.9 or 20. It was hard for me to read on the...
It's shrunk up.
But can you, I hate to, if you could remember each home, the height of them? I'm sorry about that.
I'm really good, but I don't know if I'm that good to remember every single house. Okay, we want to go, now you have to remember too, the height is being taken from the existing grade, not the final grade that would be higher. So
the final grade will be higher?
The final grade will be higher, but the house doesn't get higher. So
Okay.
if we're talking about the height of the house, what we're talking about is the height from the current, where the ground is currently.
Okay.
Okay? So on Lot 1, 29 feet from current. Lot 2, 30. Lot 3, oops. 28. for a two-story section. A lot of it is not a two-story section. Did I say that's lot number 4? Sorry, lot number 4 is 28. Okay.
27.
What's this? $29.25 is lot 3 from the existing. Oh, this is a good one. 30 feet, number 5. Looks like 22 and a half is number 6. Yeah? Number 7. $30.
Okay, thank you very much. Sorry, Commissioners, I needed that clarification. Thank you.
Commissioner Telesfor, do you have any other questions? Okay. Commissioners, any other questions for our applicant? Okay, seeing none, thank you. And that closes the public input portion of this. And I am going to look to my commissioners now, first to see if there are questions that you may have of staff, and then we could go through and talk about our thoughts on each of the items that are required of us. Commissioner Jensen, did you have a question? Or
2 questions for staff. The first question has to do with the FAR comparison, and at page 10 of the staff report, and you're discussing compatibility, and it says, although the square footages and FARs of the proposed residences would be larger than the majority of existing residences in the surrounding neighborhood, as noted above, staff finds that the proposed residences are compatible with newer, and I'm adding that emphasis, residences built in the neighborhood. So my question is, why did staff choose only newer houses to look at, and how many newer houses are you referring to, and where are they?
Well, the newer homes in the neighborhood, I mean, the homes in this neighborhood are relatively old, so staff considered it a fair comparison to look at new homes in the neighborhood to see what has been improved in the recent past and compare that to this proposal. Further, because this is a PD subdivision, if this were a traditional subdivision, floor area ratio wouldn't be as much of a concern because approximately a third of the site is being dedicated to open space. So in terms of density, staff felt that it was comparable to the neighborhood.
Okay, just a comment on your answer, then I do have a second question. I'm surprised at your answer because we have residential design guidelines which define which houses you look at for compatibility, so we've never made a choice of newer versus existing, so I'm surprised at your answer. My second question is, if this were not a planned development and it was going to be developed under existing rules, how many houses could be put on the property?
I believe that would be 9.
Not in an ideal world, or just if setbacks were, I know often it's calculated by, well, the general plan allows X. If you did zoning requirements and setbacks and riparian corridor, et cetera, and a street width that was regulation and FARs that were regulation, how many houses could you put on?
I don't know that I can answer that. I know a 9-lot subdivision was proposed as a PD prior to that, to this application many years ago. So that analysis hasn't been done, taking into account, streets and other deductions that would need to be made.
I would like to add that it cannot be a standard subdivision because the lot does not have adequate frontage to meet street requirements.
Okay, so I take your answer as meaning that since this lot doesn't have adequate street frontage, essentially, if the town code were followed without a planned development, there would be no houses there.
Well, there'd be one house.
Okay. So how many houses? One is the answer.
Right, if you would not have the standard street. If you wanted a standard street, yes, you could only have the one house.
If I could rephrase to answer my question, the homes in that area under R18, what is the FAR that they must follow in a normal if it were just individual homes?
Well, it would depend on the lot size and the slope.
Okay.
But we don't have any of the slope calculations for those lots, and those homes do not have property lines meeting riparian corridors and buffer areas as well.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Telesford.
As a follow-up on that, could I just ask a question? It's further on that, in the same vein, it says staff believes the unique site characteristics, topography, and location should be taken into account when considering the issue of neighborhood compatibility. Could you be a little more specific with that? As to, it sounds like you have a perspective that you want us to consider when we consider neighborhood compatibility, which is one of the items we have to consider tonight. So can you be a little more specific with that?
Well, I think it mostly has to do with the visual characteristics of the property, because it is sloping down away from Linda Avenue. So from the greater neighborhood, I think really only Lot 7 is the primary home that will be seen. So, and also, of course, it's, it's a unique property because of the creek and riparian, the large riparian area that will be set aside.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions of staff? Okay, what I'd like to do now is I'd like to just, let's get the ball started in terms of discussion and deliberation. As I mentioned, there are a lot of facets to this. There are two recommendations to Town Council that we need to make. The first is with regards to the EIR approval or disapproval, and accompanying that is certification of the mitigation monitoring plan. So that's one of the issues that we have to make a decision on tonight. The second is, again, a recommendation on the plan development. And as was discussed in the beginning of this meeting, those decisions in many ways will lead to the architecture and site discussion that will ensue. But what I'd like to do is I'd like to break it up so that we at least focus on that, so that there's not so much hypotheticals as we talk about architecture and site. So I'm going to open it up and see who'd like to take a stab and start sharing their thoughts on those portions of this application. Commissioner O'Donnell.
If we take those in order, then I would just like to comment on the environmental impact report. I thought the environmental impact report, as the name suggests, it's the final, so it was the original EIR plus the comments turning out to be the final EIR, was very complete. It seemed to be responsive to all of the issues being raised, and I believe it supported that the project would have been fully mitigated, such that there would be no unmitigated impacts, and therefore I think the EIR is something that we could recommend approval for.
Thank you. Commissioner Erickson?
Yes, I don't need to repeat everything Commissioner O'Donnell just said, but I would have said exactly what he said.
Okay. Commissioner Jensen?
With respect to the EIR alone, I agree with Commissioner O'Donnell and Commissioner Erickson. I think it's adequate, and if that's the only finding we need to make, that it's full and complete, then I would be prepared to make a motion to then accept the EIR just on that basis as we look at the report itself.
Okay. Commissioner Telesford?
Yes, also I would agree with my fellow commissioners that the proposed mitigation measures are in place for all the environmental concerns that have appeared before us, and it appears that the natural resource issues are within the standards according to Fish and Games and the Water Board agencies. Considering the biological issues, I thought the 25-foot enhanced setback was considered adequate for the area. I think that it's certainly far superior to what is there now, or not present. And I would like to applaud the developer for going forward with this and working with all the issues that came before us that had to do with, that were mentioned in this report. So I thought that it should be, that we should forward this on to council for approval.
Okay. I'll go ahead and, for many of the reasons that you guys have said, I completely agree that the environmental impact report is complete. And what I find especially acceptable and actually promising is that as you read through the document, you find that the entire process was very collaborative. There were lots of changes that were made from the draft to the final that showed that it really was, it was an ongoing process where the impacts that were identified were really considerably being brought down to a less than significant. So for that reason, I feel that this portion is something that we can just move off the table. So if someone can make a motion, and let's make this decision and this recommendation to council.
I will.
I think a motion was made, was it not?
I think I actually did make a motion, as long as I can segregate out only the EIR, is what we're talking about now. My motion would only be to approve the EIR and make the finding that it's complete as indicated by Chair Sayoc. And if I'm allowed to do that, that's what I'll do.
Okay, and then I do have a second from Commissioner O'Donnell. So with just the EIR, let's go ahead and get a vote on that. So all those in favor of the recommendation to certify the EIR and the mitigation monitoring reporting plan? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so that's 5-0. Okay, the next recommendation that I'd like us to concentrate on now is the plan development. This is where it gets a bit complex. If there are portions of architecture and site that need to feed into the discussion, that's fine, but as we've learned in previous applications, all of that is part and parcels. But I would like to just open it up now and see where people feeling on this plan development as the application is before us. Commissioner O'Donnell.
This is somewhat of a question, I think. If the commission, well, first question I guess I have is of the town attorney. There are only 5 of us here sitting on this. Do we need a majority of the 5 or a majority of the 7?
This is a recommendation of the council, so it would be a majority of the quorum, which is the 5 right now.
Okay, thank you. The other thing, I guess, is if we were not to agree, or if we said, no, the PUD that is being requested essentially is denied with a recommendation of something else, it isn't clear to me why we would bother to get in the architectural site approval. So I just wanted, before we get into this, because after listening to the questions, it seems to me we may have some disagreements on whether the PUD as proposed should be approved. But I'd first like to clarify, just to find out if we're going to move on after the PUD is either approved, rejected on recommendation, or suggested to be modified. Unless it's approved, is there really any point in going on with the architectural site approval? And this is a question to staff, including the town attorney.
Well, as indicated earlier, the commission has options. The argument to go ahead with the architectural site approval would be that the town can, you're making a recommendation, let's say you make a recommendation on 40 lots or 6 lots. We don't have a design for a PD on that, but the council will. The council will have the 7 lots that's proposed. So there, they would also have your, actually, they'd have your approval on the A&S. And then the applicant, if they were able to convince the council 7 lots, they'd have an approved A&S. What the plan director has indicated that until you know that, you might want to just continue that matter, because it essentially is an approval, which will be an invalid approval if the council embraces 5. Or
let me just suggest to the chair that the thing I'd like to avoid is any needless time spent. For example, if if the majority of the commission should really reject the 7 lots, and then we go ahead with, but if we didn't reject it, you know, here's what we think about the site approval. It's so hypothetical, and we can just bog ourselves down. I think the suggestion that if we should reject the 7, we continue the ASA to see what the council does. My only thought is that might save us a good deal of time.
I completely agree. The reason why I brought, if there are certain architectural features that play into your decision, you may feel free to bring it. We've had issues in the past where, again, not naming names, but, you know, two-story homes in this particular site would not do it for me. And those were specifics that led to a denial on a plan development. I agree, let's stick with efficiency, so let's focus on the plan development without getting into the specifics of the 7. But if there's considerations that you feel is necessary to justify your decision on the PD, then I'd like for you to just share those with us. So, but again, let's focus on the PD, and there were 3 portions of the PD that staff report has identified that differs from a traditional development. There was a lot of discussion of a PD versus a traditional development, but one of those areas was the reduced lot area. This is all on page 6 of our staff report, the increased floor area ratio and the reduced street width. But certainly one of the other areas they've highlighted for us is the density and intensity issue, and the issues that people that spoke in the neighborhood brought up. Those are all issues that if you'd like to share with your commissioners, feel free. Does anyone want to be the first? Commissioner O'Donnell.
I'll be the first, but I may be a lone voice on this one, I don't know. I sat through the original, when this came through before it was sent to court and came back to us. So part of my feeling tonight is I've heard a lot of this before. I did go out to the site on the original application. I did look at the story poles at that point. I did go out again today. I do recall the discussions of the size of the street. I do recall the discussions of making it public, allowing it to be open. I do recall what I believe was the neighbor's opposition to a full-size street, the neighbor's opposition to making it public. I heard a lot of that, and therefore, by the time I came to this and the EIR, I felt that, one, it did comply with all of our requirements. I could see how somebody could argue with that, but I think that the staff's position is entirely justifiable. Doesn't mean the commission obviously has to agree with it. I happen to agree with it, but part of my agreement simply depends upon my having sat through this process. And so I have what I think is a perhaps more complete view of the process than I would normally have. Therefore, the reduced lot area for one lot is such a small trade-off for what I otherwise see as a very good project. In other words, a lot of open space, and the way the riparian area will come out a lot better than it is today, and that includes all the neighbors. So I think we're talking about 200 feet, as I recall, and therefore I think the reduced lot area for one lot is indeed a good trade-off. The increased floor area ratios, I think that this is a perfect site for a planned development, and I think it is, when people talk about building in the hills and we've got plenty of room, I think one of the things we don't want to do is just use up plenty of room. And I think these houses fit quite nicely into this area. I think an awful lot of work has been done to make them fit nicely. I think the project has been responsive to the neighbors' concerns, and particularly in light of the court decision. As far as the reduced street width for a private street, part of this, I think, was the neighbors' concern that it would be a full-size street and therefore would be a traffic problem. Now, maybe I misremember that, but that's what I recall. In any event, the reason it's 22 feet is, again, as a trade-off on the open space. If there were not so much open space, we've had a lot of discussions about where the setback is, and I read all that stuff, and I realized that reasonable minds might differ, but I happen to agree with what the EIR and our staff has said. And therefore, as far as the reduced street width is concerned, I think under the circumstances of getting these good houses, these good improvements, this open space, this project, I believe, can basically only go forward with essentially this I say essentially because I'm not hung up on 7, although I think it makes sense here, with this reduced width private street. So on those 3 things, A, B, and C, I would agree with staff that we can support that.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Donnell. Any other thoughts? Commissioner Erickson?
So I was one of the commissioners who wasn't here to get the whole story, though I've reviewed some of the materials from the past, and so have tried to envision what would be the so-called perfect development of the site under consideration, or one that would, perfect in this case, being both acceptable or desirable for the owners and for those people that are impacted and live in the neighborhood. And understanding that you couldn't go forward with development of the property except as a planned development because of the restrictions on the place. So it seems to me I would agree with Commissioner O'Donnell that reducing one of the lot sizes by what is really a nominal amount seems to me not to be a significant issue that should stand in the way. I am concerned about the size of the street. Reducing the size of the street, though, didn't have the benefit of being here to know whether that was a significant concern of the neighbors or not the first time around. So I guess I would in general never be in favor of reducing street size for a whole variety of reasons. I would trust that it seemed to me the houses that are proposed to be developed on the individual sites seem to me to fit the sites appropriately, so they're designed well and are sensitive to the nature of the site and to the mass and the scale and the impact that they would have, at least site to the best that I can imagine that without the story poles, having been there since I wasn't out there at the time. So I've actually been out to the site 4 times since Saturday. So trying to imagine. So my only concern, and I can't, this would be pure speculation, if one could reduce the number of lots developed on the property, and there's all kinds of considerations with that, would that address some of the concerns? I don't have any way to judge that because there isn't a plan before us that one could evaluate. So.
Commissioner Jensen?
Guess we're going down the line. I also was not here when this was first considered. I'll address the specifics, then I'll address the policy issue. So the 3 exceptions that are being requested are a reduced area for 1 lot. That can come about only as a result of the planned development. The EIR, in fact, indicates that 6 lots is preferable and more environmentally preferable, albeit small, but still preferable. It also indicates that 5 is preferable. If you did not reduce the size of 1 lot, you could get 6 or 5 lots that would be within town ordinance regulations, not require an exception, and per the EIR, be more environmentally desirable. Increased floor area ratios, the 7 lots proposed are significantly higher floor area ratios than the existing neighborhood, and I think our town codes, regulations, and design guidelines do not allow one to pick and choose which residences one compares. So I think you have to compare the 34 houses that are listed at page 9 and 10 of our staff report, and the fact is of the 7 proposed residences, all of them are equal to or greater than all but 6 of the houses in the neighborhood. I absolutely don't think it's appropriate to pick and choose which houses you compare to. So I think that the floor area ratios, I don't think that there's any particular reason to increase those. I don't think that there was evidence that was presented to us which gave us a good argument for why they would be compatible. So I would not be prepared to make that exception. with respect to the reduced street width, I'm with Commissioner Erickson. I really don't believe there's a reason to reduce street widths. And again, this comes back to the policy question that I'm going to address. Commissioner O'Donnell, Commissioner Erickson indicated that this property can't be developed without a reduced street width. In fact, it can with one house under our town ordinances without making an exception. And increasingly, and this is my policy argument, increasingly applicants come in with plan developments where they're not necessarily appropriate. They're not, and I'm not arguing that this one is not necessarily appropriate. It's more appropriate than a lot I've seen, given the topography of the land. However, I don't agree with most of what Mr. Ryan said, but I agree that plan developments are more often than not used to squeeze as many houses as possible onto a lot. And I don't think that that's good planning. And I don't think it's good planning here. So I cannot support the project as proposed, and I would hope that policymakers in the town would revisit the issue of whether it's appropriate to come in with a plan development on virtually every lot, which is basically used to reduce our standards. So that's just a policy argument. And I can't resist saying that I don't think that it's appropriate to say, well, at least we're not building on the hill. Well, you're not building on the hill because that's not where your property is. So, I mean, I also sit on an organization which looks at infill development. I evaluate transit-oriented development, and your project wouldn't qualify under the standards of the organization I worked for a transit-oriented infill development. So I'm not persuaded by that argument. So at least I could not support the project as proposed.
Commissioner Telesford.
Thank you. Always hard to be making these comments, but when I look at a PD like this, I have to wonder if the exceptions are promoting a more integrated site plan that's really going to be beneficial for the people that are going to be living there and the neighboring development. And I'm happy, or I'm willing to work and grant exceptions if they make sense and if they answer my density concern, and also that as really with regard, as I thought you probably knew where I was going with the height and maybe perhaps some of the square footage as it affects the impacts to some of those smaller lots. So when I would look at this, I would have to say that what really, and it's too bad, I remember seeing the visual impact of the story poles the first time I was out there, which was in 2007, and it was quite revealing of the impact of the height of them. And so for me to probably approve this, I would like it, the exceptions, I mean, you'd have to bring down the height. That's basically where I am on that. And I know there are imaginative ways to do that and innovative ways, and maybe you haven't come up with it. But hopefully, when I look to approve a PD, I'm looking to approve it because it has incorporated designs that really work to make the livability of the area superior and has excellence in design. And I'm not talking about the architecture of the homes, the style, the character of them. I'm talking strictly about the height. I think reducing the height would go a long way with this development. As far as I could agree with the environmental report that said, the alternative 2 or 3 would have some positive alternative in design. I could agree with that. I think that it might be what we were looking for in the first place when you came before us at the CDAC, which is way back in 2005. And I think at that time we had asked for 1- and 2-story homes, which would be compatible then with the surrounding neighborhood, wouldn't it? And I don't see that here. Let's see, what else would I say? So could I support this I guess I can't support this PD as it's before us today, but those would be my comments, and let me see if I have more later, if we can come back.
Okay,
Okay,
thank you
thanks.
for that. So, going down the line, just to be succinct, I would not recommend approval of the application that is before us. And the reasons for that, I'll go ahead. There are 4 large reasons for it. What I do like is that throughout the process, I believe all the environmental issues have been addressed. And that was as I mentioned earlier, a very collaborative process, and I believe those issues have been reconciled, and we can almost just put those aside. But there were other issues, specifically the density, that had not been reconciled just yet. And I do believe that alternative 1, the 6-home development, what's that mean, is environmentally superior, as stated in the EIR that we just recommended approval for. But also, if you look at page 7 of the staff report, when it talks about density, this is one of the tables that made me really think about the 6 versus 7 home development. If you look at the comparison of the project without or with the riparian setback buffer, and it looks at all the different scenarios, you're looking at virtually 1 unit per acre difference from the Linda Avenue neighborhood. And then when you add to that if you made it a 6-home development versus 7, you give more square footage per lot so that the reduced lot area is no longer consideration. You'd give more square footage per lot so that the floor area ratio would be reduced, and it would then be more in line with the immediate neighborhood. And then maybe, that has yet to be determined, you might have more street width for the private street. I don't have strong feelings whether it should be 36 to 22. I do think that the imperviousness of the street compared to its location of a stream, I think that is a justifying reason. But when I look at the floor area ratio of the proposed homes and the floor area ratios of the homes immediately adjacent to it, and what I did was I went to the site and I looked at what are those that are immediate based on our residential design guidelines. And if you follow the 225 from the site, and it's a little difficult because it's one large site and it's not a traditional block, but if you try it and follow it, if you look at the 2 homes to the left, 2 homes to the right, and that across, really the largest FAR of those 5 that you pull out is 0.19. And of the proposed designs that we have before us, the smallest is 0.25, and then you go all the way up to 0.35. To me, that's not really reconciling with the immediate FAR of the neighborhood. So for those reasons, and I think I cited 3, I would be strongly in favor of a 6-home development. Now, we don't have a design in front of us, and that gets into the process issue of how do we continue from here. So this is something where I'm going to need commissioners and staff. Is it best to continue the matter? Is it best to deny? That's something that I'd like to hear more input and see what's more efficient, given the comments that we've given here, and what would be more efficient process-wise for the staff. Commissioner O'Donnell, you had your hand up first.
This is always a difficult question, because if it's something that you really think you can massage and come out with a result that will be helpful, then I would say let's continue it. And so here I have no crystal ball, but my feeling is, having sat through this now for some years, and having remembered where it started, that it might be better to send this along to the town council, because either the council is going to agree with the majority sentiment, by far the majority sentiment of the Planning Commission this evening, which would be very helpful, or the council itself will disagree with this, and which also, of course, would be helpful to the applicant. If we simply continue it so they can come back with what? I don't think we can tell them that they must come back with a 6 or a 5. We can tell them that that would be more attractive to us, and therefore might get approved by us, but who knows. It's just difficult for me to see how that serves anybody well. So having heard my fellow commissioners, I personally would think it would be a good idea to want to have one of you commissioners make a motion approving the EIR, recommending approval of the EIR, but denying the planned development for the reasons you've all stated. It's fairly clear. And then on that get to the ASA, the architectural site approval. So, I mean, that's just, that's not something written. It's just my feeling on where we are.
Commissioner Erickson?
I guess I would generally agree with Commissioner O'Donnell. I mean, I was sitting here thinking it went from 11 to 9 to 8 to 7. So I was trying to imagine for myself how low should one go before one, you know, if you go, obviously you could go from 11 to 1. So I guess I'm not sure what would be served by continuing it and inviting them to propose once again fewer lots in the development. I think there are a complexity of issues, so it would seem fairest to me for the applicant, if we believe that we could not accept the PD as proposed, to let it go forward if they, to the council without our support. The applicant could obviously decide not to go forward and could withdraw it and propose something different if that was their choice, or could let it go forward without our recommendation to the town council, let the town council deal with the question of how low should one go.
Commissioner Jensen?
First, I have a process question. If in fact someone were to make a motion to deny it as presented, does it go to the council on appeal? It wouldn't go to the council with a denial, would it, automatically?
This matter will be forwarded to council, whether you recommend approval or denial. If you do recommend denial, the applicant would need to write a request to be forwarded to council, which is just a standard policy.
Then my second process question is, I think that the 3 commissioners who had trouble with the application stated their reasons for that very clearly on the record. If a motion for denial was made, would those reasons need to be restated, or could one simply refer to those statements made in the record?
Council will get verbatim minutes, so they will see what your comments are.
Okay, and that's really for the interim town attorney. If there's a motion for denial, is it appropriate for us to simply refer to the comments made?
Yes, it can be. It can also be, you can also add to that any other recommendation you would have for this project. In other words, if you could agree on, you'd like to see one of the alternatives of 6 lots, you could certainly recommend that to the council too.
Jensen?
With the chair's permission, I think given the discussion that's gone on tonight, I don't think it would be appropriate to recommend an alternative. However, I would make a motion to deny the project as presented. I think we already have a motion moved, approved, recommended with respect to the EIR, forwarding that to town council. But with respect to the PD, my motion would be, for the reasons stated by Commissioner Tallis, for myself and Chair Sayoc, to deny the application as presented. And given that motion, then specifically state that no architecture in sight will be considered by the Planning Commission tonight.
Okay. Do I have a second?
Before I do that, could I ask a question of staff?
Yes.
So the architecture and site would come back to us? May I ask that question?
I'd recommend that you continue it to a date certain. It would definitely be after the council hearing, obviously.
Okay,
to clarify, we would move the architecture and site portion only to a date certain.
Correct.
Okay.
So the appropriate motion would be to deny the PD and deal with that, and then if that's approved, then make a separate motion with respect to architecture and site.
Correct. And then you also need to make a motion regarding the mitigation monitoring plan.
I thought that that was included in the EIR motion.
It wasn't specifically stated.
Okay. if you could specifically, it sounds like you're going to make a motion, so if you could wrap all
Okay,
four together.
so the first order of business is with respect to the EIR, and,
Specifically, the mitigation monitoring plan.
okay, we have moved and approved or recommendation of the EIR as complete to the town council. The next question is, will we also move and approve as complete and recommend that the council adopt the mitigation monitoring plan that's contained with the EIR, and I would move that we do so.
Okay.
And I'll second that.
And we have a second to that, so let's get a vote for the mitigation monitoring plan. All those in favor?
Aye.
So we have 5-0 on that. Okay.
Okay, the second motion is to deny the plan development as presented tonight for all of the reasons stated by myself in our comment section, by Commissioner Talasfor, and by Chair Sayoc.
And do I have a second on that? Commissioner Erickson?
I'll second the motion.
Okay. So all those in favor of the denial of the plan development as is? All those in favor? I hear one aye. Just, it looks like I have 5 ayes. Okay. Okay, so we have 4 aye, and then all those that wish to deny it.
No, we're the other side of the coin. You've got 4 for denial and 1 not for denial. So.
That's correct. Okay, let's clarify. I have 4, so we just did denial. Those who want to approve the application as is, the PD application as is. And that would
We don't
be-
have that motion.
Okay, I'm kidding.
It's like, all in favor of denial would be 4.
4.
All those not in favor of denial would be
1. Okay. I'm looking to my attorney. Do you understand? Because it looks like I finally got it. Okay, so we now have that.
Okay, the third and final motion would be to continue the architecture and site application to a date certain, and what would that date be?
Earliest would be September 22nd.
Okay, so I would move to continue architecture and site consideration of this application, should it come back to us, to September 22nd.
Do I have a second for that?
I will second.
Okay, and those all in favor of that?
Aye.
So now we have a 5-0. Okay.
And since the architectural and site did not move forward, there's no appeal period for that yet because it has been decided upon. The town council was originally scheduled to review the PD as it would be recommended up by the planning commission next Wednesday, but we now believe, we'll confirm tomorrow, that we may have to renotice that meeting for a later time. So I just want to make everybody aware of that, that's in the audience, that it probably may not happen next Wednesday. Thank you.
Okay, so I would like to take a 5-minute break. So agenda item 2 is done. And actually, I have 2 quick comments that I believe I have from 2 of my commissioners before we proceed to agenda item 3.
I'm recused off of agenda item 3 because my residence is within 500 feet of the project.
And I'm recused because the developer of my development is our president of our homeowners. Thank you.
Okay, we'll be back in 5 minutes. Okay, let's reconvene. We are now on agenda item 3. Let's see. Okay, agenda item 3 is for plan development application PD-10-003 at 371 Los Gatos Boulevard. Ms. Davis, can you provide an application summary and staff report, please?
Sure.
This property is located on the southwest corner of Los Gatos Boulevard and Caldwell Avenue. We have an approved plan development on the property. The project site is 2.6 acres. The previous development on the site was a convalescent facility. That facility has been completely demolished, and construction of the new project is underway, which includes renovation of the historic Thrash House. The Planning Commission last saw the project in March of 2009, at which time it was a 20-unit project. The Commission forwarded the project to the Council with a recommendation for approval. And then the Council, through their course of discussion, 1 unit was eliminated from the project. So it is now a 19-unit project, and that is 18 new units and the Thrash House restoration. An initial study and negative declaration were done at the time the plan development was approved, and that mitigated negative declaration was certified by the Town Council in May of 2009. No further analysis is required from an environmental perspective. The applicant is proposing to amend the plan development to allow the BMP units to be located off the project site. 2 units were included with the project, and they were intended to be located on the corner of Caldwell and Los Gatos Boulevard as a duet unit. The applicant is now proposing to provide 3 units off-site and to construct 1 residence in place of the proposed BMP duet. 3 properties have been purchased. 2 of them are a condominium project on Alberto Way, and 1 is in a condominium project on Laura Drive. Information on those units is attached to your staff report. The merits of this proposal include provision of an additional affordable unit. BMP units will be provided in locations where there are not currently any affordable housing units. The BMP units will be available immediately following approval of the plan development amendment, if that is the decision of the council, rather than waiting for these new units to be constructed and occupied, which would probably be a couple of years out. 2 of the units are within walking distance of the downtown. The 2 Alberto Way units are similar in size and composition to the units that were approved for the project. The applicant is also agreeing or offering to lower the affordability unit. The affordability of 1 unit was supposed to be 80% of median income, and 1 was supposed to be 100%. They've offered to take that 100% unit down to 80, and then to provide the third unit at 80%. The BMP units, the BMP guidelines support provision of like-size units and integration of affordable units into a development. Staff believes the applicant's proposal satisfies both those criteria. What would happen on the project site itself is the applicant is proposing to put 1 unit in place of the duet unit. That will open up the corner a little more, providing a little more open space, better yard areas for the units that are out there. There's a perspective that was provided with your plans, and then the elevations and everything is posted up on the wall as well. The Commission's role is to provide a recommendation to the Town Council on this proposal. The required finding is that the plan development amendment needs to be consistent with the general plan. It is still technically a rezoning, even though we would not be actually changing the zoning on the property. We would be changing the composition of the plan development ordinance, so it's still technically a rezoning. The draft plan development ordinance has been provided to you, and the new text is bolded so you can see what was changing. The existing ordinance is actually attached as well. That concludes staff's presentation, and if you have any questions, please let me know.
Do I have any questions for Ms. Davis? Commissioner O'Donnell.
I think I have 2 questions. If you look at page 5 of your report, there, in the first full paragraph, I'm a little confused, because if you went back to page 4, we talk about the BMP guidelines, and then on page 5, when we talk about the general plan discussions, and you say the Town Council ultimately allowed off-site construction for residential projects with up to 9 units. I'm a little confused. We're being asked for a recommendation tonight. Are we saying that, notwithstanding that the Town Council has limited it to 9 units, because it's a guideline, we could recommend to the council that it do something in excess of their 9-unit limitation?
Yes, yes, that is the suggestion.
But I mean, why is that? I guess
it's a plan development, so they can ask to it's not even really a code. This would be a deviation from the guidelines, not the code
I just wanted to confirm, so we're talking about guidelines?
The BMP guidelines that have been adopted by council.
Okay, and let me see if I have that
So
second.
it is a policy issue.
Yes, I understand it, but as opposed to a code requirement or a we shall kind of thing. But that was the only question I had.
The question I have of staff is, because it is a policy issue, are there policy implications we as a recommendation need to consider, or those implications are what council would consider when they ultimately make their decision when this comes to us? Like, we're just recommended based on this specific, so that it doesn't change any policy. That's a policy discussion that they have at their meeting?
Well, I think the commission can give its opinion on whether they think there's merit to this proposal on the part of the applicant. And yes, it is ultimately the council's decision as to whether they want to deviate from that policy. And then there's two ways of doing it. One is to make an exception just to this plan development that's project specific, or we could look at the BMP guidelines and possibly amend it to allow off-site units for larger projects.
Any other questions? Okay, then I will look to Ms. Jennifer Skillings as the applicant. You have 5 minutes, and this is the only card that I have in front of me. And so you can refute yourself if you'd like, but you have 5 minutes.
There it is. Good evening, Chair Sayak, members of the Commission. My name is Jennifer Skillings. I'm with Santa Clara Development Company. I am joined this evening by Mark Robeson and John Garcia. And I want to thank Suzanne and staff for their hard work on this proposed amendment. I think that the staff report pretty much covers everything. I just want to briefly point out that though we had this PD approved last year, we have continued to look for opportunities to improve the project in the neighborhood through the architecture, through the site planning, through the details. And the home that we're proposing now is, it's a very attractive single-family home, and it fits within the fabric of the neighborhood. It's actually 10 feet narrower in footprint than the approved duplex, and it's 5 feet shorter than the approved duplex. So that adds to the separation in the yards, as Suzanne pointed out, and just makes for a better feel along the boulevard. The additional benefits to having the off-site BMPs, including the third BMP unit and at the 80% income level, two within walkable distance to the downtown, all contribute to what we see as a really good thing for this project and for the town. And that's all I really have to say. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have, though.
Commissioners, do you have any questions? Commissioner O'Donnell.
This is a question that is answered. I'm just not remembering. But my recollection is that you're also proposing, in essence, to reduce one unit on the site.
Right. So
Okay.
a lesser density on
Right.
the site.
So that is another arguable benefit, too. I just want to be sure we're on the same page. And then the other question, you didn't discuss that, I don't think, but staff report talks about 17 Fiesta House. And it wasn't crystal clear to me. And if things happen such that the Fiesta House were again available to you, I think your proposal had been that instead of, well, I'm confused. What would you do with the Fiesta House, and how would that impact the ultimate number of homes on your site?
Well, you may be aware that we had a proposal in when we had hoped to get the Fiesta House. It would have been very similar, and it would have been one single-family home. It would have been smaller, obviously, because the Fiesta House was smaller. And we, at the time, were proposing 2 off-site BMPs to mitigate for the loss on site. So, you know, if the Fiesta House were to become available, we would certainly have something to talk about.
But that would be what I don't understand, since maybe I should, what I'll do is I'll direct this question to staff. Thank you very much.
Okay. Any other questions? I do have a question. I'm in favor of reducing the density by 1. Is there something specific that made you rethink of bringing down the density by 1 unit?
Well, frankly, our goal wasn't to bring down the density. It was to improve the aesthetic and the feel along the boulevard, which happened to mean to make this house smaller, have a smaller footprint, it didn't work with it being a duplex. So that's an added benefit that the density is being reduced, but ultimately our goal is to make this corner, as it's so prominent along Los Gatos Boulevard, to make it look better and feel better.
Thank you. Commissioner Erickson.
I'm going to assume your answer to this question, but I'll ask it. So one of the criteria to off-site, the acceptance of off-site BMP units is that it's not practical, it's impractical to include them on the site. So I assume that you, because you didn't suggest redoing the development in another way that would have accomplished the goal of the improvements that you're suggesting along the boulevard, but then relocating the BMP units on other parts of the planned development, that it isn't practical. Is that, I mean, I assume that you didn't look at that.
Well, we considered it. We're pretty far down the road on the project site with the improvements that have been installed in the homes that are under construction.
So it'd be reasonable to conclude that it wouldn't be practical to do that. That's just as part of the record.
Mr. Machichi.
How soon would you have to get word on the Fiesta House to accept the Fiesta House?
Well, we've already got, an investment in designing this house, and we'll very soon begin construction documents and construction presumably.
So
within, it would be within the next month or two, we would probably need to.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much. Okay, we'll close the public portion of this and public comment portion of this. And I look to my commissioners for any comments and or resolution. Commissioner O'Donnell.
Just a comment, because you raised the issue of, is this a single action we're taking on this site, or are we suggesting something for the plan? Personally, since I think to consider other than on this site would require a fuller discussion and different preparation than we have, I would like to consider it on this site, on these facts, and make a recommendation based on that and limit it to that. So I just throw that out. So in our discussion, perhaps others can address what they feel about that.
Absolutely. Thank you for that clarification. Commissioner Erickson.
I guess I was going to make the exact same point, and then the other observation I would make, it seems like to me I would suggest that we not include in our discussion, our deliberations, any consideration of the Fiesta Way home. It's speculative about whether it would become available, and it doesn't serve any useful purpose. It seems like to me to do that. We should consider what's in front of us, not what might or might not happen because something else may fall through.
Very well.
I'll comment on Commissioner O'Donnell's request and say I would avoid the slippery slope and restrict it to this application. I would also like to make a motion.
Please do.
I'd like to make a motion to recommend approval to amend the plan development to allow off-site BMP units and construction of one fuel unit within the project, our property zoned RM5-12 PD and R-1D LPH PD, APN 52922-044. I find that the proposed zone change is internally consistent with the general plan and its elements.
And do I have someone who'd like to second the motion? Commissioner Erickson?
I'll second with a comment.
Okay.
That it's reasonable for us to recommend something that's not fully consistent with the guidelines that the council had, because there are other gains for the town, the gains that are specifically noted in the staff report, and that the applicant has proposed is that it improves the development, and particularly its look along the boulevard, and it creates more open space and creates less density. And so I think those things are the basis upon which we should consider an exception to the guideline, and I would also want us to clearly reflect that it's applicable only to this property.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
I have a question. I certainly agree with the motion and Commissioner Erickson's remark about the Fiesta, but I wanted to make sure I heard from staff, because I found the Fiesta discussion confusing, and having heard the applicant's response to where they are and what we know about where the town is, I'm fully prepared to vote on the basis that we're not dealing with Fiesta. But before we do that, I wanted to ask staff, do you have anything you want to tell us before we do that? Like, please consider Fiesta.
The reason that's in there is because the original proposal, when the applicant first came in with the plan development amendment application, their proposal was to move the Fiesta House to that corner slot. And staff was supportive of that. The Historic Preservation Committee was, well, they were split on the issue. We were looking at 2 sites. Initially, when they considered a number of sites for the Fiesta House, this site was indicated to be the top preference. We had a subsequent site come up late in the game. We went back to Historic Preservation Committee, and they split. A couple thought this site was more appropriate. A couple thought the other site was more appropriate. Ultimately, the decision was made that the house could go to the University Avenue location. We wrote into the plan development ordinance that should that fall through, because we had a previous attempt at moving the house fall through within 2 days of moving the house, and we ended up moving it out to Larkin, Winchester. So we didn't want to preclude it from going here if something fell through with the other proposal, and they backed out for some reason. If we didn't include it in the ordinance, and then the house became available and Santa Clara Development wanted to consider having it, we'd have to come back and amend the ordinance again. So that's the reason it's in there. And as Jennifer mentioned, it's likely that if in the next couple of months it doesn't become available, it'd be a moot point.
I guess my point is, I don't know that anybody is against facilitating something that might occur. On the other hand, if it were clear to us that should that occur, I mean, I, for one, would like to know where it's going to go in light of this proposal.
It would replace the new residence on the corner that they're proposing.
Okay. So what we're saying is the motion as it is tells us one thing, and if we were to amend that motion to say, but if within, pick a time frame, I don't care what it is, the Fiesta were available, and indeed the applicant chose to use Fiesta, they could do so in place and instead of the proposal as made. Is that what you're asking for? That was clear, wasn't it?
No, it's just, yeah, it still requires an architecture and site approval. It's just it's basically a backup plan, and you can ask the applicant, they may not care if it's in the ordinance any longer.
Yeah, I understand it, but as long as we aren't making them do something, they...
No, it was just an option, because that was their original proposal, to relocate that house to this property and to put it on that corner location. So it would either be the Fiesta House or the unit that you see on the rendering up on the screen in that same location. That there wouldn't be any deviation from where it went.
Just a point. Commissioner Erickson has stated that you didn't want any relationship to the Fiesta House. What I'm hearing, though, is that it is a backup plan that's part of the ordinance, and that if we approve this motion, we're also approving that backup plan. Is that correct?
There is a provision in the ordinance to allow it to be considered if it became available.
So we should remove what you said on that? Or?
So it is in the draft ordinance.
I assume that you made the motion based on what Commissioner Erickson had said, and therefore it specifically did not include Fiesta.
No, I originally made the motion with it in, okay? In the seconding, he asked to take it out. I never commented on it.
Well, let me clarify my second. I simply seconded the motion with a comment. Doesn't change them. I would suggest it doesn't change the motion.
We're okay.
And so to clarify this, the motion and the second does not change the language in the attached draft ordinance that we have before us.
Thank you.
Okay. So all those in favor?
Aye.
So that's 4-0.
Okay, and this matter will be scheduled for a town council hearing. It will be noticed, and notification will be sent to the neighbors.
Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, commissioners, we still have a meeting to continue. So that concludes the continued public hearing. We have no public hearings. We have no continued other business. As for new other business, do we have a report from our director?
No report.
Okay. Commission matters. We have none. So this meeting is now adjourned.